The rain poured down heavily that night, striking the tin roof of the abandoned bus stop like sharp little stones. The water rushed past the gutters, making the air smell of wet earth and sadness. A figure sat there, shivering in the dark. Her gray hair clung to her face, her clothes soaked through, her thin hands trembling as she hugged an old handbag tightly against her chest. That figure was Grandma Margaret, 78 years old, fragile, tired, and with nowhere to go. She had just been pushed out of the house she once called home. The very house where she had raised her children, cooked countless family meals, and told bedtime stories to her grandchildren. Now at 78, she sat alone on a cold, concrete bench while strangers passed by without even turning their heads. Some saw her but looked away quickly, as though her misfortune might be contagious. Others muttered under their breath, calling her another homeless old woman. But no one stopped. Lightning split the sky, and the thunder roared so loud that even Grandma flinched. Her bag slipped from her hands, spilling out a few crumpled clothes, a framed photograph of her late husband, and a rosary she had always carried in her pocket. She bent slowly, painfully to gather them, her eyes filled with tears. How did it come to this? How did a woman who once had everything, family, a home, respect, end up sitting in the streets, shivering in the rain at 78 years old? Her stomach growled, but she had no food. Her body ached, but she had no bed. The photograph of her husband stared back at her, reminding her of better days, of promises that life would always get easier. Yet here she was, forgotten, abandoned, and homeless. A police car passed by slowly, its lights flashing in the distance. For a moment she thought they would stop and help. But they didn't. They just drove on. Another car splashed water onto her skirt as it sped by, and she quietly muttered, "Lord, is this how it ends for me?" She pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, but it did little to stop the cold. Her eyes closed and her mind drifted back to where it all began. She remembered the warm smell of bread in her kitchen, the sound of her children's laughter, the pride of her husband when he built the family home. And then she remembered the betrayal, the day everything began to fall apart. But before she could sink into that memory, a dark shadow appeared at the bus stop. A man stood there, tall, with his face hidden under a hood. Slowly, he began to approach her. Grandma's heart skipped. Would this stranger help her? Or was he coming to hurt her? The night had already taken so much from her, and now something worse was about to begin. Many years earlier, things had been so different. Margaret was a proud mother of 3. She had married her sweetheart, John, when she was only 19. Together they had built a small but happy life in a quiet neighborhood. Their home wasn't big, but it was filled with love. John worked as a carpenter, and Margaret was known as the woman who could cook the best apple pie in town. Their children, Daniel, Susan, and Peter, were raised with values of kindness, respect, and family. Neighbors admired the family, often saying, "The Johnsons may not be rich, but they are rich in love." Margaret would smile every time she heard that, her heart swelling with pride. But life has a way of changing when you least expect it. When John passed away suddenly from a heart attack, Margaret's world cracked in half. She cried every night for weeks, gripping the side of her empty bed. The children promised they would always look after her, that she would never be alone. At the funeral, Daniel even held her hands and said, "Don't worry, Mom. We'll take care of you. Always." She believed him. For a while, things went smoothly. She continued living in the family house. Her children visited on weekends, sometimes bringing the grandchildren. They laughed, they ate together, they celebrated birthdays. Margaret felt safe, loved, and secure. But slowly, things began to change. It started with small arguments. Susan complaining that the house was too big for Grandma to handle, Daniel asking about the property papers, Peter suggesting they sell the house to make life easier for Mom. Margaret resisted at first. "This is my home," she would say firmly. "I raised you all here. I'm not leaving." They smiled and nodded, but their eyes told another story. As the years passed, the visits became less frequent. Calls became shorter. And every time they came, the conversations circled back to the same topic. The house. "Mom, you don't need this much space anymore." "Mom, think of the money you could get if you sold it." "Mom, you should move in with one of us instead." Margaret refused again and again. That house was all she had left of John, of the life they built together. But one day, without her knowledge, the papers were signed. Daniel had somehow convinced her to put the house under his name, just for safekeeping. He told her it was to protect her from taxes, from fraud, from outsiders who might trick her. She trusted him. He was her eldest son after all. Little did she know, it was the beginning of her downfall. Back at the bus stop, the hooded man stepped closer. Grandma Margaret's eyes widened, her frail hands gripping the bag tightly. "Are you all right, ma'am?" The man's voice broke the silence. It was deep but not unkind. Margaret hesitated. She didn't know whether to answer. Strangers could be dangerous. But then again, so was being alone in the middle of the night. I don't have anywhere to go," she whispered, her voice shaking. The man sighed and looked around, then slowly sat down beside her. He smelled faintly of cigarettes, but his tone was gentle. "It's not safe for you out here. Do you have family?" Family. The word stung her heart like a knife. She thought of Daniel, Susan, and Peter. The same children who once promised to protect her. The same children who had slowly pushed her out of her own home. Her lips trembled. "I did," she said softly. "But not anymore." The man studied her face for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. "Well, tonight, I guess you're not alone." Before she could answer, another flash of lightning lit up the sky, followed by a deafening crash. The power lines nearby sparked, and a tree branch fell just a few feet from where they sat. Margaret screamed, clutching her bag. The hooded man jumped up, his eyes darting around. "Come on," he said urgently. "We can't stay here." But Margaret froze. Her heart pounded as memories of the day she was thrown out came flooding back. The shouting, the betrayal, the tears. Her mind was torn between the danger in front of her and the pain behind her. And then in that exact moment she realized, this night was only the beginning of a struggle she never imagined she would face at 78 years old. The hooded man grabbed her arm, trying to pull her to safety as the storm grew wilder. But Margaret resisted for a moment, her voice trembling. Why did my children do this to me?" she whispered. The man looked at her with confusion. "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, another branch snapped loudly above them, threatening to fall right where they stood. The night was no longer just about being homeless. It was now a fight for survival. And Margaret wasn't sure if she was ready for what was coming next. The wind howled louder, carrying with it the sound of cracking branches and rattling rooftops. Grandma Margaret's heart pounded as the hooded man tugged her arm, urging her away from the bus stop. Rain stung her face like tiny needles, and the water pooled around her shoes, soaking her thin socks. "Come on, ma'am," the man shouted over the storm. "It's not safe here." But Margaret's legs felt like lead. Fear and exhaustion glued her to the bench. Her mind swirled with confusion. Was this stranger really trying to help her? Or was he dragging her into more danger? She had trusted before. And that trust had cost her everything. The tree branch above groaned, split, and then came crashing down. It slammed against the ground with such force that the bench shook. Margaret cried out, finally stumbling to her feet. The man caught her elbow, steadying her. "Good," he said firmly. "Now move." They ran, or rather he half-dragged her, through the pounding rain down the flooded street. Margaret's breath came in short gasps. Her chest ached, and her old knees screamed in pain with every step. Still, the man didn't slow down. Finally, they ducked into a small alley, where the storm wasn't as fierce. Margaret leaned against the wall, clutching her chest, coughing hard. The man pulled off his hood, revealing a young face, barely in his 20s. His hair was plastered to his forehead, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "You could have been crushed out there," he said, shaking his head. Margaret struggled to catch her breath. I don't even know who you are." He offered a half-smile. "Name's Ryan. Don't worry, I'm not here to hurt you." But trust wasn't something Margaret could give easily anymore. She tightened her grip on her bag. Why are you helping me?" she asked cautiously. Ryan shrugged. "Why not? You look like you needed it." Something about his voice calmed her, even though doubt still lingered. She studied his wet clothes and worn sneakers. He didn't look dangerous. If anything, he looked tired, like someone who had seen his own share of struggles. Margaret sat down on the cold ground, her back against the wall. The storm raged on outside the alley, but here it was quieter. Ryan crouched in front of her, his eyes serious. "You said something back there," he began. "About your children. What did you mean?" Margaret's lips trembled. The words burned inside her, waiting to spill out. She had been holding them for too long. "They betrayed me," she whispered. "My own blood. They took everything." Her voice cracked, and tears mixed with the rain on her face. Ryan didn't speak. He just listened, and for some reason, that gave her strength to continue. It had all started a year before. Margaret remembered it clearly. The day Daniel, her eldest son, showed up at her house with a folder of papers. He had come with Susan, and they both looked unusually serious. "Mom," Daniel had said, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. "We need to talk about the house." Margaret frowned. "Not again, Daniel. I've told you already I'm not selling." Susan leaned forward, her voice soft but pressing. "It's not about selling, Mom. It's about protecting you. If something happens, if you get sick. We don't want strangers trying to take the house from you." Margaret narrowed her eyes. "What are you talking about?" Daniel slid the papers toward her. "This is just legal stuff. If you sign it, the house stays in the family. It'll still be yours. You'll live here as long as you want. We're just making sure no outsiders can take advantage of you." Margaret hesitated. She didn't understand all the words on the papers, but the way they looked at her, their voices so calm, so persuasive, it made her believe they had her best interests at heart. After all, they were her children. So she signed. That signature was the beginning of her nightmare. First, nothing changed. She still lived in her home, cooked her meals, tended to her small garden. But slowly, their visits became colder, more calculated. Daniel would talk about fixing up the place and renting out rooms. Susan would mention how expensive the house was becoming. And then came the day they told her. "Mom," Daniel said firmly, "the house is under my name now. You need to move out." Margaret's heart nearly stopped. "What? No. This is my home." Susan avoided her eyes. "You can stay with me, Mom. It'll be easier for you. You don't have to worry about bills anymore." Margaret shook her head violently. "I don't need easier. I need my home. Your father built this house with his hands. Every corner of it has a memory. You can't just take it from me." But they already had. The papers she had signed, trusting them, believing them, had given the house to Daniel completely. Her name meant nothing on those documents anymore. The arguments grew louder. She pleaded. She cried. She begged them to let her stay. But her words fell on deaf ears. Finally, one cold afternoon, Daniel showed up with two men she didn't know. They carried boxes, packed her belongings, and set them by the door. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice hard. "You can't stay here anymore." Margaret clutched the doorway, her body trembling. "Daniel, please. I raised you here. Don't do this to me." For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt. But it vanished quickly, replaced by determination. "This isn't your house anymore, Mom," he said flatly. "It's mine." And with that, her own son pushed her out. She remembered standing on the front steps, her bag in her hands, staring at the closed door that used to welcome her home. Her knees gave out, and she fell to the ground, sobbing. Neighbors watched, whispering, but no one stepped in. That was the day she became homeless. Ryan's eyes widened as Margaret finished her story. He shook his head in disbelief. "Your own kids did that to you? That's cold." Margaret wiped her tears with her sleeve. "I don't understand it. I gave them everything. I worked, I sacrificed, I fed them even when I was hungry myself. And this is how they repay me." Ryan sat back against the wall, running a hand through his wet hair. "People are cruel sometimes. But family? That cuts deeper." Margaret nodded slowly. Her chest ached, not just from the cold, but from the weight of her broken heart. The storm outside began to calm, the thunder rolling farther away. For a moment, there was silence between them. Then Ryan asked, "Do you have anywhere you can go tonight? Any friend, any relative?" Margaret shook her head. "No one." Ryan hesitated, then took a deep breath. Well, I know a place. It's not fancy, but it's dry. You'll be safe there. Margaret's eyes narrowed. What kind of place? Ryan stood up, offering his hand. A shelter. Not the best, but better than the streets. Margaret stared at his hand. She didn't want to rely on strangers again. But she also knew she couldn't survive another night like this. Slowly, she placed her frail hand in his, and he helped her up. They began walking through the dark, wet streets. Margaret's legs wobbled, but Ryan supported her. She didn't know what awaited her at this shelter. She didn't know if she could trust him. But one thing she knew for sure. Her life had changed forever. As they turned a corner, Margaret saw a group of rough-looking men gathered near the road, laughing loudly, bottles in their hands. Ryan's face tightened. He whispered, "Stay close to me." Margaret's heart pounded. The men turned, spotting them. One of them grinned wickedly. "Well, what do we have here?" he sneered, stepping forward. Margaret froze. Ryan clenched his fists. The storm might have passed, but a new danger was just beginning. The alley reeked of alcohol and smoke as the men stepped closer, their laughter echoing off the wet walls. Margaret's trembling hand tightened around her bag, as if the thin fabric could shield her from the danger. Ryan shifted his weight, positioning himself between her and the group. The tallest man, with a scar across his cheek, pointed his bottle at Ryan. "What's this? A hero protecting Grandma? Where you two heading, huh?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "We're just passing through. Leave us alone." The men laughed, a cruel sound that sent shivers down Margaret's spine. Another one, with missing front teeth, leaned forward. "Passing through? Nah, no one passes here without giving us something." His eyes dropped to Margaret's bag. "What's in there, old lady?" "Money. Jewelry." Margaret clutched the bag tighter. Inside was all she had left. Her husband's photograph, her rosary, a few clothes. Not much, but to her they were priceless. Ryan stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Back off." The scar-faced man smirked. "Or what? You'll fight all of us." Margaret's breath quickened. Her heart raced painfully, each beat echoing in her ears. She had seen her son turn cold and cruel, but this was a different kind of threat. Real danger. The men began to circle them, their footsteps splashing in the puddles. Ryan lowered his stance, ready to defend, but Margaret knew he was just one young man against 4 grown thugs. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Just let us go." Scarface sneered. "You hear that? She's begging. Makes me want to take her bag even more." One of the men lunged, grabbing at Margaret's arm. She screamed, stumbling backward. Ryan reacted instantly, shoving the man away. The bottle fell and shattered against the ground, glass scattering everywhere. "Big mistake," Scarface growled. The group closed in. Ryan swung first, his fist connecting with one man's jaw. The thug staggered, cursing. Another came at him, and they locked into a rough fight, fists and elbows flying. Margaret pressed herself against the wall, clutching her bag, tears streaming down her face. "Stop," she cried. "Please stop." But the night didn't listen. The clash grew louder, more violent. One of the men shoved Ryan hard against the wall, while another tried to snatch Margaret's bag. She held on with all her strength, her thin arms trembling. "No. This is all I have left," she cried. The thug yanked harder, and Margaret lost her balance, crashing onto the wet pavement. Pain shot through her hip, and a cry escaped her lips. "Grandma!" Ryan shouted, breaking free and lunging toward her. He tackled the man trying to take her bag, knocking him into a puddle. Scarface swung his bottle at Ryan's head, but Ryan ducked, the glass shattering against the wall inches away. Margaret crawled backward, her body shaking with every movement. She had never felt so fragile, so powerless. Memories of her children shoving her belongings into boxes flashed in her mind. Once again, she was being stripped of everything she held dear. And then sirens. Red and blue lights flashed at the end of the street. The thugs froze, exchanging nervous glances. Scarface spat on the ground. "You're lucky tonight, kid." They bolted into the darkness, disappearing around the corner just as the police car screeched to a halt. 2 officers jumped out, shining their flashlights. "You two all right?" one asked. Margaret struggled to sit up, clutching her hip. Ryan helped her to her feet, breathing heavily. "We're fine. Just some guys causing trouble." The officers glanced around, but the men were long gone. "This isn't a safe area," one of them warned. "You shouldn't be out here, especially at this hour." Margaret's voice cracked as she answered, I have nowhere else to go." The officer's stern face softened slightly, but only for a moment. "There's a shelter a few blocks from here. You should head there. It's not much, but it's better than the streets." Ryan nodded quickly. "That's where we were going." The officers gave a short nod, then drove off, leaving them in the dim glow of the streetlights. The silence that followed felt heavy, broken only by Margaret's quiet sobs. Ryan turned to her, his voice gentle. "Can you walk?" Margaret winced, her hip throbbing, but she nodded. "I'll try." He supported her carefully, and together they continued down the street. As they walked, Margaret's mind drifted again to the moment her children betrayed her. She could still see Daniel's face, cold and determined, shutting the door in her face. She could still hear Susan's soft but cruel voice, telling her it was for the best. The wound in her heart was deeper than any physical pain. How could her own children, flesh of her flesh, turn against her like strangers? And now, even the streets had no mercy. Finally, they arrived at a small building with peeling paint and a faded sign. Hope Haven Shelter. A tired-looking woman sat at the front desk, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Ryan helped Margaret inside. The air smelled of disinfectant and stale bread. Rows of metal bunk beds lined the room, some occupied by snoring figures wrapped in thin blankets. The woman at the desk looked up. "Registration?" she asked flatly. Ryan answered for Margaret. "She needs a place to stay tonight." The woman sighed, sliding a clipboard toward them. "Fill this out. We don't have private rooms. She'll have to share." Margaret's hands shook as she tried to hold the pen. Ryan gently took it from her, filling out the form. The woman handed them a blanket and pointed toward the bunks. "Find an empty bed. Lights out in 10 minutes." As Ryan led her to a bunk, Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She had never imagined herself here, in a shelter surrounded by strangers, sleeping in a bed that wasn't hers. Once, she had a warm house, a family, and a kitchen full of laughter. Now she had only a thin blanket and a heart full of sorrow. Ryan helped her settle onto the lower bunk. She clutched her bag tightly to her chest, terrified of losing the few things she still had. "Try to get some rest," Ryan said softly. "I'll be nearby." Margaret nodded, though sleep felt impossible. Her mind replayed everything. The storm, the fight, the betrayal. She closed her eyes, whispering a shaky prayer. But just as she began to drift into uneasy sleep, a loud crash echoed across the room. Someone had thrown a chair against the wall. A man with wild eyes staggered through the shelter, shouting angrily, "Who stole my blanket? I'll kill you all if I find out." The entire room stirred with fear. Margaret sat up, her heart racing again. She thought the shelter would mean safety, but instead it seemed like another storm was just beginning. The night at Hope Haven Shelter was only the beginning of a painful journey, but it was also the start of Margaret's awakening. She had been betrayed by her own children, pushed out of the home she built with her late husband, and left to face the cruel world with nothing but a bag of memories. The storm, the fight on the streets, and the chaos inside the shelter all showed her one truth. Life could take everything from you in an instant. But through the darkness, she found unexpected light. Ryan, a stranger she met in the storm, proved that kindness can still come from the most unlikely places. Though he had struggles of his own, he chose to protect her when no one else would. His presence reminded her that not all hearts had turned cold. As the days passed, Margaret learned to adapt to her new reality. She stayed at the shelter, shared meals with strangers, and listened to the stories of others who had also lost everything. She realized that homelessness wasn't just about losing a roof. It was about losing dignity, security, and trust. And yet, within that brokenness, she also discovered resilience. Her children's betrayal was the deepest wound of all. Daniel, Susan, and Peter had taken her home, but in doing so, they had revealed something Margaret never wanted to see. That greed could blind even the ones you love. That realization hurt, but it also freed her. She no longer held on to false hope that they would save her. Instead, she learned to save herself. And that was the lesson she wanted others to know. Family is not always about blood. Sometimes, family is found in the people who choose to stand by you, even when they have nothing to gain. Margaret's struggle at 78 was heartbreaking, but it also carried a message. Life is fragile, trust is precious, and kindness, even from strangers, can mean the difference between despair and survival. She may have lost her home, but she didn't lose her will to live. She may have been abandoned, but she wasn't completely alone. And though her story was filled with sorrow, it was also filled with courage. So, when you pass by someone on the street, someone who looks tired, lost, or broken, remember Margaret's story. Remember that behind every weary face is a history of love, loss, and struggle. And sometimes all they need is a hand, a word, or a simple act of kindness to remind them that their life still matters. Because the truth is, anyone could lose everything, but everyone can choose compassion. And that is the legacy of Margaret's unbelievable struggle. A reminder to love deeply, to give freely, and to never take family or a home for granted. Broken heart.